They know we must act now.
How certain are you?
My source is solid. We have to move.
Welcome
They know
to
we
Shadows
must
of
act
Black
now.
History.
How certain are you?
We are
My
honored
source is
that you are
solid.
here
We
with
have to
us
move.
today. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you are watching from, your city, your country, and the time. If you have not subscribed yet, please subscribe and like this video. Your support helps us bring powerful and layered stories to life. Stay with us until the very end, because this story is one you will not want to miss even a single paragraph. It is suspenseful. It is intense. It is deeply psychological. Now, relax. Remove distractions. Clear your mind. And pay very close attention as we begin. This video is a work of historical fiction. The characters, events, locations, and timelines are fictional and created for narrative purposes, inspired by themes of resistance, power, and survival. September 15th, 1851. Savannah, Georgia. By sunrise, 20 overseers would be dead. No gunshots echoed across the fields. No blades were raised in open combat. No rebellion stormed the gates. Only whispers, and one enslaved coachman named Cato, who never once lifted a weapon. The plantation outside Savannah was known for discipline. Visitors spoke of its efficiency. Cotton rows stretched wide and orderly beneath the Georgia sun. The main house stood tall with white columns and long windows that reflected both wealth and control. The master rarely stepped into the fields. His power lived in structure, in rules, in men he appointed to carry out his will. Those men were the overseers. There were 20 of them assigned across the main plantation and smaller satellite farms nearby. Each oversaw separate groups of laborers. Each answered directly to the master, and each believed he was more capable than the others. Cato drove the master's carriage. He handled the horses with calm hands and steady eyes. He transported the master to meetings in Savannah. He delivered overseers to nearby properties. He waited quietly outside taverns and trading offices. He was trusted because he seemed harmless. He was trusted because he spoke little. He was trusted because he bowed his head at the right times, but silence can be sharper than speech. Cato listened more than anyone realized. He learned who envied whom. He learned who feared demotion. He learned who worried about being replaced. The overseers did not share friendship. They shared rivalry. They compared harvest numbers weekly. They competed for praise from the master. A larger yield meant favor. Favor meant security. Security meant survival within their own world of hierarchy. Pride shaped their behavior. Pride also blinded them. Cato saw this clearly. Pride makes men sensitive. Sensitive men are easy to disturb. He did not rush his understanding. He observed. He memorized tone and timing. He waited. The first whisper came on a humid evening in January of 1851. The sky was gray with gathering rain. Cato stood beside the carriage while Overseer Daniel Briggs checked ledger entries near the stable door. Cato leaned slightly closer and spoke in a careful voice. He said he might have misunderstood something. He said he overheard Thomas Reed speaking with the master about weak discipline in the lower cotton fields. He added that he hoped it was not true. He said he thought Briggs deserved to know. Then he stepped back and returned to silence. Daniel Briggs laughed when he first heard it. He dismissed it as gossip. Yet that night, as wind rattled the shutters of his cabin, the words replayed in his mind. Thomas Reed had been meeting privately with the master more often. Thomas Reed had spoken confidently at the last review meeting. Had Reed questioned his performance? Had Reed hinted at replacement? Doubt is quiet at first. It whispers back. Weeks later, Cato drove Thomas Reed into Savannah for supply purchases. The road was long and narrow. lined with tall trees that swallowed sound. Cato waited until they were halfway back to the plantation before speaking. He said he hesitated to mention it. He said Daniel Briggs seemed upset after hearing that Reed believed he mismanaged equipment repairs. He said he thought Reed should know someone was questioning his competence. Then he returned to steady silence, eyes fixed forward on the road. Thomas Reed did not respond immediately, but the seed was planted. When men compete for power, even imagined criticism feels real. Reed began watching Briggs more closely. Briggs began questioning Reed's instructions. Their exchanges shifted from polite to tense. Other overseers noticed. Some took sides quietly. Some added their own assumptions. Cato did not repeat himself. He did not exaggerate. He allowed suspicion to breathe. Once doubt enters a room, it multiplies on its own. He understood something simple. Men in authority fear losing it more than anything. By early spring, tension had grown across the plantation. Overseer Marcus Hale believed someone was inflating harvest reports. Overseer Samuel Cutter accused Hale of shifting blame for broken tools. Small disputes erupted during weekly evaluations. The master saw increased productivity and assumed competition was driving success. He praised firmness. He encouraged discipline. He did not see the deeper fracture forming beneath the surface. Cato continued his routine without drawing attention. He held doors. He cleaned wheels. He stood in corners while conversations unfolded around him. He absorbed every tone of voice. He noticed who drank more than usual. He noticed who avoided eye contact. He rarely invented anything entirely. Instead, he rearranged truth slightly. A late meeting became a private complaint. A frown became a criticism. A casual remark became a hidden insult. One evening in May, an argument between Briggs and Reed escalated in front of 3 other overseers. They accused each other of miscounting cotton bales. Voices rose. Threats were implied. Though no physical fight broke out, the room felt smaller afterward. The others walked away with sharpened opinions. No one trusted fully anymore. Cato stood outside the stable and listened as raised voices drifted into the yard. He did not smile. He did not react. He only memorized what had shifted. The plantation began dividing into small circles of loyalty. Groups formed around shared suspicion. Each man believed someone was trying to undermine him. Each man believed the master might be secretly comparing them. Cato knew he had reached a turning point. He reduced his whispers. He let tension grow without interference. Summer arrived heavy and unforgiving. Savannah heat pressed down like a weight. Tempers shortened. Patience thinned. Overseers monitored one another more than they monitored the fields. Reports were guarded. Private conversations stopped when someone entered the room. The atmosphere felt charged, though nothing visible had yet broken. In July, a supply inventory came up short. Tools were missing. No one admitted responsibility. Marcus Hale accused Samuel Cutter of hoarding resources to inflate his section's efficiency. Cutter accused Hale of sabotage. The master demanded explanations. Each overseer defended himself aggressively. The accusations spread beyond the original 2. Names were mentioned. Reputations questioned. Cato continued driving carriages and tending horses. He positioned himself where he could overhear fragments of heated debate. He occasionally added one sentence, never more. He would say he had noticed strange late-night meetings. He would say he hoped everyone remained loyal. He would say he wished the master understood how divided things had become. Each statement added fuel without appearing deliberate. The overseers began carrying visible sidearms more often, not because rebellion threatened them from the fields, but because they no longer trusted each other. Pride had turned into fear. Fear had turned into anticipation of betrayal. By early September of 1851, the plantation felt unstable. Even the enslaved workers sensed it. Orders came late. Instructions conflicted. Punishments were inconsistent. Authority had become fragmented. The master, irritated by constant complaints, announced a mandatory meeting for all overseers at the main house on September 15th. He intended to restore discipline. He believed confrontation would clear misunderstandings. Cato drove carriages that morning from the outer fields toward the main house. He helped each overseer step down. He saw tension in shoulders. He saw distrust in eyes. He heard muttered remarks about conspiracies and false reports. He noticed hands resting close to pistols, though no one openly threatened violence. Inside the main house, 20 men gathered around a long wooden table. The master stood at the head, unaware of how deep suspicion had grown. Voices began calm but edged with accusation. One man interrupted another. Another accused two of secret agreements. Past whispers resurfaced in new forms. Every insecurity Cato had nurtured over 8 months now collided in one room. Cato remained outside by the carriage shed. He did not need to whisper anymore. The work had already been done. By dawn, Savannah would awaken to a scene no one could easily explain. By sunset, the plantation would never be the same, and Cato, the quiet coachman, would step into a future none of them imagined possible. The meeting began before noon, but tension had been building since sunrise. The master believed he was restoring order. He stood at the head of the long table inside the main house, sunlight cutting through tall windows and falling across 20 faces tight with suspicion. He opened with firm words about unity and discipline. He spoke about productivity. He warned them that rivalry must not weaken performance. He believed rivalry was still manageable. He did not understand that rivalry had already turned into mistrust. Daniel Briggs spoke first. His voice was controlled but sharp. He accused Thomas Reed of undermining him through private complaints. Reed interrupted immediately, denying the claim and accusing Briggs of falsifying harvest numbers. Marcus Hale leaned forward and added that both men had been whispering against him for months. Samuel Cutter rose from his seat and claimed he had evidence of hidden equipment transfers meant to sabotage him. The master demanded silence, but silence did not return. Cato waited outside beside the carriage shed, adjusting reins that did not need adjusting. From inside the house, voices rose, then collided. He could not hear every word, but he did not need to. He knew the pattern. 8 months of careful suggestion had layered over existing pride. Each overseer carried a version of betrayal in his mind. When men believe they are threatened, they defend aggressively. When pride meets fear, control dissolves. Inside, the master attempted to regain authority. He demanded specific proof. He called accusations reckless, but every man felt cornered. Briggs insisted Reed had been meeting privately to discredit him. Reed insisted Hale had warned him about Briggs weeks ago. Hale denied it and accused Cutter of spreading lies. Cutter slammed his hand against the table. Voices overlapped. The master's control slipped further with each interruption. The first physical shove happened without warning. Marcus Hale rose from his chair and pointed directly at Reed, accusing him of theft. Reed stood as well. Chairs scraped across wooden floors. Briggs stepped between them, not to calm, but to accuse both of collusion. In seconds, the meeting had shifted from heated words to visible hostility. The master ordered them to sit. No one listened. Outside, Cato heard the crash of a chair. He did not move. He remained by the horses, calm and still. His face showed no expression. He had imagined this moment many times, but imagination does not bring certainty. What he relied on was human weakness. Once suspicion consumes trust, unity becomes impossible. Inside the house, someone reached for a sidearm. It was not clear who moved first. Later, no one would agree on the exact sequence, but a weapon drawn in anger changes the air instantly. Another overseer shouted. A hand struck another away from a pistol grip. In the confusion, a shot rang out. It was not aimed carefully. It was reflex. It struck the wall behind Hale. That single sound shattered any remaining restraint. Panic followed faster than reason. Men lunged at one another, convinced they were under attack. More shots echoed. Some ducked behind furniture. Others fired blindly in fear. The master screamed for them to stop. His voice vanished beneath chaos. The long table overturned. Smoke thickened the room. Each overseer believed someone else had planned betrayal. Each believed survival required immediate defense. The violence was not organized. It was confusion turned deadly. Men who had worked side by side for years now saw enemies in every direction. They did not pause to confirm threats. They reacted. They fired. They shouted accusations even as they aimed. Pride and paranoia merged into a single force that no command could reverse. Outside, enslaved workers heard the shots. They froze in place, uncertain whether rebellion had begun or punishment was coming. No one approached the house. They had learned that entering conflict among overseers rarely brought safety. Cato remained where he was, steady beside the horses. He counted the shots quietly in his mind. 1, 3, 5, 10. Then too many to count clearly. Inside, smoke and shouting filled the room. Some tried to escape through side doors, but collided with others attempting the same. Misunderstandings escalated. A shove looked like aggression. A raised arm looked like an attack. Defensive fire met defensive fire. No one paused long enough to realize they were fighting shadows of suspicion rather than confirmed betrayal. When the gunfire finally slowed, it was not because peace returned. It was because exhaustion replaced fury. Some men lay motionless. Others were wounded. A few staggered back, breathing heavily, faces pale with shock. The master stood near the shattered window, stunned and powerless. He had called the meeting to restore order. Instead, he had watched authority collapse entirely. As the smoke thinned and the reality of what had occurred settled into the room, silence replaced shouting. It was a silence filled with disbelief. 20 overseers had entered that house. Not all would leave standing. Pride had driven them to compete. Suspicion had driven them to accuse. Fear had driven them to fire. The master moved carefully among fallen bodies, calling names. Some answered weakly. Some did not answer at all. Those still conscious looked at each other with confusion rather than anger. In the aftermath, each realized too late that no single conspiracy had existed. The threats they feared had been fragments of rumor and insecurity. Yet the cost had already been paid. Cato finally stepped toward the house when summoned by a trembling servant. He entered quietly, eyes lowered. He observed the overturned table, the broken glass, the stunned master. He did not display satisfaction. He displayed obedience. He assisted in carrying the wounded to wagons. He drove them toward Savannah for medical care. He listened to fragments of explanation that did not align. Each man blamed another. No one blamed himself. By dusk, news had begun to spread through Savannah. A tragic internal conflict among plantation overseers, a meeting that spiraled beyond control. No one outside that room could reconstruct the sequence clearly. Rumors varied. Some claimed a secret alliance. Others claimed drunken anger. No version captured the months of careful psychological tension that led there. That night, the plantation felt hollow. The structure that had enforced daily discipline had shattered. With many overseers dead and others wounded or arrested for investigation, control weakened immediately. The master faced not only personal loss, but economic instability. He could not admit that internal rivalry had consumed his leadership. He could not reveal how fragile his authority had been. Cato returned to his quarters as darkness settled across the fields. His family waited in silence. They had heard the shots. They had seen smoke rise. They understood something irreversible had occurred. Cato spoke softly. He said the plantation would change. He said opportunity sometimes hides within chaos. He said they must be ready. For 8 months, he had whispered carefully measured words. Now he would speak only to those he trusted most. Freedom was not yet declared. Chains had not fallen. But the men who enforced daily terror were gone. By dawn, decisions would be made about reorganization, about arrests, about blame. In that confusion, pathways would open that had not existed before. The revenge had not been loud. It had not required strength of arm. It had required understanding of pride and fear. The plantation that once thrived on rigid order now stood fractured, and Cato, the quiet coachman, had never raised his hand. Morning came slowly over the plantation outside Savannah. The sun rose the same way it always had, casting long light across the cotton rows, warming the red Georgia soil. But nothing else felt the same. The air carried a strange stillness. No overseer whistles cut through dawn. No boots struck the yard with sharp command. Instead, there was confusion. There were wounded men groaning inside the main house. There were servants moving in and out, carrying water and cloth. There was a master, pacing with a face drained of certainty. Cato rose before first light as he always did. He fed the horses. He checked the harnesses. His movements were steady, controlled. He did not rush. He did not linger. From the outside, nothing about him had changed. But inside, he understood the balance of power had shifted overnight. The structure that had controlled every breath on that land had cracked, and cracks, once formed, rarely closed perfectly again. The master summoned him just after sunrise. His voice sounded thinner than usual. He ordered Cato to drive him into Savannah immediately. There would be inquiries. There would be legal explanations. There would be efforts to contain scandal. As Cato guided the carriage down the narrow dirt road, he listened to the master speak to himself in fragments. He blamed reckless tempers. He blamed alcohol. He blamed rivalry. He never once mentioned whispers. He never once considered the possibility that something invisible had guided the collapse. In Savannah, news spread quickly through taverns and trading houses. A deadly conflict among overseers, a meeting that turned violent. Some called it proof that too many men competing for favor creates instability. Others shook their heads and said pride always carries consequence. No one questioned the coachman who waited patiently outside offices, holding reins with calm hands. Back on the plantation, uncertainty created space. Without 20 overseers enforcing rigid control, daily routines loosened. A few wounded men remained under guard in Savannah for questioning. Others had been buried quietly before sunset the previous day. The master needed replacements, but replacements could not appear overnight. The fields still required management. Crops still required harvesting. Enslaved workers moved cautiously at first. Years of strict discipline do not disappear in a single morning. They expected punishment to return swiftly. They expected new overseers to arrive with harsher measures. But days passed without full structure restored. Orders were inconsistent. Instructions conflicted. For the first time in many years, small gaps in supervision opened. Cato observed carefully. He did not act impulsively. Freedom is not seized recklessly. It is navigated strategically. He began speaking quietly to trusted individuals among the enslaved community. Not about rebellion, not about escape in haste, but about preparation. He reminded them that confusion among those in power can create opportunity. He reminded them to remain disciplined, to avoid drawing attention. Meanwhile, the master struggled to present a stable narrative to Savannah authorities. He insisted the conflict had been sudden and unpredictable. He emphasized that it was an internal matter among white men. He feared that if word spread too widely, his reputation would suffer. Investors might hesitate. Neighbors might question his control. Pride again shaped decisions. Pride again prevented full honesty. As investigations unfolded in town, contradictions emerged among surviving overseers. Each gave a different account of who reached for a weapon first. Each claimed self-defense. Each insisted others had plotted against him. The authorities found no clear conspiracy. They found no organized rebellion. They found only confusion fueled by rivalry. Eventually, the matter was labeled tragic escalation. Charges were softened. Responsibility blurred. Cato listened carefully whenever the master discussed these findings. He noticed relief in the master's tone. Relief that no outside force had been identified. Relief that no enslaved involvement had been suspected. The collapse had been framed as pride turned violent. That narrative protected the plantation's broader standing. But inside the quarters, something subtle had changed. Fear, that once hung constant now, felt less absolute. The men who had enforced punishment daily were gone. The memory of gunfire inside the main house had altered perception. Authority no longer felt invincible. It felt human. It felt flawed. That shift in perception matters deeply. When power appears vulnerable, imagination expands. Cato's wife asked him one night if they would run north. He shook his head slowly. He explained that running without preparation invites capture. He said patience had guided him before, and must guide him again. He believed the master's desperation to rebuild stability would create negotiation space. He believed timing mattered more than speed. Weeks passed. Replacement overseers began arriving, but fewer than before. The master decided to reduce their number. Claiming efficiency required less rivalry. He consolidated management. He gave greater responsibility to fewer men. This decision, meant to restore order, unintentionally reduced the daily presence of enforcement across the fields. Supervision thinned further. Cato noticed that the master relied on him more often. With trust shaken among hired men, the master preferred the steady presence of his coachman. He asked Cato to deliver messages. He asked Cato to observe certain workers discreetly. Each request expanded Cato's movement across the plantation and into town. Movement creates information. Information creates leverage. One evening in October of 1851, the master spoke privately with Cato after returning from Savannah. He confessed frustration. He said reliable overseers were difficult to find. He said discipline required loyalty. He looked at Cato and remarked that loyalty was rare. Cato lowered his eyes respectfully. He responded softly that stability grows from trust, not fear. The master nodded absent-mindedly, not fully considering the weight of that statement. Gradually, the master began assigning Cato supervisory errands that placed him between field sections. Though not formally titled overseer, Cato carried messages and instructions. Workers responded carefully, but respectfully. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He relayed expectations calmly. Productivity did not collapse. That fact surprised the master. Order, he realized, did not always require constant intimidation. By late autumn, the plantation operated under a fragile but functioning system. Fewer overseers, more centralized direction, less visible rivalry. The master believed he had corrected the flaw that led to disaster. He believed reduction of competition had restored balance. He did not recognize that the true shift had been psychological. Fear had been redistributed. It no longer flowed only downward. It had flowed upward as well. Cato understood that freedom would not come through dramatic confrontation. It would come through repositioning. He continued earning trust. He continued demonstrating reliability. When the master faced financial strain due to the earlier scandal, he considered selling assets quietly to stabilize accounts. Among those assets were enslaved families not considered essential to core operations. Cato approached carefully. He requested permission to work for hire in Savannah on certain days, offering to share earnings. He framed it as financial assistance to the plantation. The master, seeing opportunity to reduce strain without selling laborers outright, agreed to limited arrangement. That agreement marked a subtle step. Movement beyond plantation boundaries, even temporarily, created possibility. The revenge that had begun with whispers was evolving into something quieter but more lasting. It was no longer about destruction. It was about transition. The plantation that once enforced absolute control now depended on the calm steadiness of the man it had overlooked. And Cato, who never raised a weapon, had reshaped more than a single meeting. He had altered the architecture of authority itself. Winter approached Savannah slowly in 1851. The air cooled, though the tension that had once filled the plantation had already shifted into something else. The violent collapse of the overseers was no longer discussed openly. It had become a subject spoken in low tones among white planters, and never spoken at all inside the main house. The master preferred silence. Silence protected reputation. Silence buried embarrassment. But silence does not erase memory. It only drives it deeper. Cato's movements expanded under the master's new arrangements. Twice a week, he drove into Savannah, not only to transport his employer, but to conduct small hired tasks. Deliveries, repairs, messages for merchants. The master allowed it because the additional income relieved pressure after the scandal. Cato returned each evening with coins carefully accounted for. Trust increased with every successful trip. Trust, once given, becomes difficult to withdraw without reason. Inside the enslaved quarters, subtle change continued. The absence of constant overseer presence meant fewer sudden punishments. Instructions still came. Work still demanded effort. But the tone shifted. The new overseers, aware of the previous disaster, avoided open rivalry. They monitored each other cautiously. They avoided confrontation inside the main house. Fear of repeating history kept tempers measured. Cato did not interfere with this fragile balance. He understood something important. When a system collapses violently, those who rebuild it often overcorrect. They become careful. They hesitate. That hesitation creates space. and space can be used wisely if patience guides it. In Savannah, Cato observed life beyond the plantation more closely than ever before. He watched free black men moving cautiously through the marketplace. He listened to sailors speak of northern cities. He heard murmurs about changing politics. It was 1851, a time when tensions between states were growing, though not yet open war. The world outside the plantation was shifting slowly, just as it had within. One afternoon, while waiting outside a law office for the master, Cato overheard a discussion about legal petitions for manumission. Rare, difficult, but not impossible. Certain financial arrangements, if structured carefully, could allow an enslaved person to purchase freedom. The price was high, the conditions strict, yet the path existed. That knowledge settled deeply in Cato's mind. He did not show excitement. He stored it quietly. When he returned to the plantation that evening, he spoke gently with his wife. He told her about what he had learned. He explained that freedom through law required coin, trust, and timing. They already had trust growing. They could begin gathering coins slowly through hired labor. Timing would depend on the master's financial strain and emotional fatigue. He believed both were increasing. Meanwhile, the master struggled privately. The loss of 20 overseers had damaged his confidence. He no longer relied fully on hired men. He leaned increasingly on Cato's steady presence. He asked for advice on small matters. He inquired about field morale. Each question carried unintended power. Authority, once rigid, had become dependent. By early 1852, nearly a year after the meeting that ended in disaster, the plantation operated under a new rhythm. Fewer overseers meant less fragmentation. The master positioned himself as central decision-maker, rather than delegating fully. This shift required him to interact more frequently with laborers and rely on intermediaries he trusted. Cato became one of those intermediaries. Cato never abused that position. He did not command harshly. He did not assert dominance. He simply relayed expectations clearly and fairly. Workers responded with steady effort. Productivity remained stable. The master, observing this consistency, began viewing Cato not as property alone, but as essential management support. That perception would become critical. One evening in late spring, the master confided in Cato about financial pressure. Cotton prices had fluctuated. Legal expenses from the overseer incident had drained resources. He considered selling land parcels to maintain liquidity. Cato listened carefully, then spoke with measured humility. He suggested that loyal laborers working part-time for hire in Savannah could supplement income without asset sale. The master considered the idea seriously. Within weeks, the arrangement expanded. Cato and 2 other trusted workers received permission to take limited paid tasks in town under strict supervision and revenue sharing. It was framed as economic partnership rather than generosity. But economic partnership creates records. Records create leverage. The community inside the quarters noticed the shift. Hope, once fragile and dangerous, began to breathe again. Not loudly, not recklessly, but quietly. Cato emphasized discipline. He warned against drawing attention. He reminded them that 1 year earlier, pride had destroyed those who underestimated psychological influence. Now, patience must secure what whispers had opened. In Savannah, Cato built relationships carefully. A blacksmith, a stable owner, a small merchant willing to speak discreetly about financial agreements. Coin accumulated slowly, not enough for immediate freedom, but enough to demonstrate capacity. Meanwhile, the master's dependence grew subtly stronger. When conflicts arose among the reduced overseer staff, the master sought Cato's assessment before deciding. That shift represented a deeper reversal than anyone outside could see. The plantation that once rested entirely on the authority of white overseers now rested partially on the judgment of an enslaved coachman. Cato did not celebrate this. He understood it as transition. Influence gained must be handled carefully. Too much visibility invites backlash. By summer of 1852, whispers had long ceased. Their purpose had been fulfilled. The overseers had destroyed one another through fear and suspicion. What followed was not chaos, but recalibration. Cato had moved from disruption to reconstruction. And reconstruction, when guided quietly, can secure more lasting change than open rebellion. As autumn approached again, nearly 1 year after the fatal meeting, Cato prepared his next step. He requested a private conversation with the master. He presented carefully documented accounts of earnings from hired labor. He demonstrated how those earnings had supported plantation stability. He proposed a structured agreement in which he could continue paid labor for a defined period in exchange for future conditional manumission for himself and immediate family. The master hesitated. Pride wrestled with practicality. Yet he could not ignore the numbers, nor could he ignore that since the overseer collapse, stability had depended significantly on Cato's calm presence. Granting conditional freedom under financial terms would secure continued cooperation and remove future liability. Negotiations did not conclude that night, but the door had opened. A door created not through weapons, not through open revolt, but through understanding human weakness and restructuring power from within. The revenge that began with 8 months of whispered doubt had evolved into something deeper. It had dismantled rivalry. It had exposed fragility. It had replaced fear with strategic leverage. Cato never raised a hand. Yet the architecture of the plantation had changed entirely. The weeks after Cato presented his proposal moved slowly, but beneath the surface, something important was shifting. The master did not reject the idea outright. He also did not accept it immediately. Instead, he studied the ledgers more carefully than ever before. He reviewed the earnings brought in from Savannah work. He calculated projected harvest returns. He measured risk. His pride resisted the thought of granting freedom. Yet his practical mind understood dependency. Since the deaths of the overseers, stability had rested on fragile ground. Cato did not press the matter again too quickly. He continued his duties with the same calm discipline. He drove the carriage. He managed field messages. He reported honestly on labor output. He brought earnings from town precisely counted. Trust deepened not through demand, but through consistency. The master began relying on Cato's presence in subtle ways. When tension rose between the reduced overseer staff, the master asked Cato what he had observed. When shipment schedules shifted, the master asked Cato for suggestions. Each question reinforced a new hierarchy, invisible to outsiders. Inside the quarters, Cato spoke carefully to his family. He told them negotiations require patience. He explained that desperation would signal weakness. They must appear steady, grateful, dependable. Freedom pursued recklessly can collapse opportunity. Freedom pursued strategically can secure permanence. His wife listened with both hope and fear. Hope because the door had opened. Fear because doors can close quickly if pride is wounded. In Savannah, rumors about the deadly meeting of 1851 had faded. The plantation's reputation stabilized. Business partners resumed normal dealings. This restoration of public confidence strengthened Cato's leverage. The master now needed continuity more than ever. Granting freedom in exchange for structured service would not appear weakness if framed correctly. It could appear calculated management. Late in November of 1852, the master summoned Cato again for private discussion. The room was quiet. The windows closed against the cooling air. The master held ledger books in his hands. He spoke carefully. He acknowledged that Cato's labor had contributed significantly to financial recovery. He admitted that reliability among overseers had been inconsistent. He then outlined terms. Conditional manumission for Cato would be granted after a fixed period of contracted service in Savannah, provided income targets were met and loyalty remained unquestioned. Immediate legal freedom for Cato's wife and children would follow upon completion of that period. During the contract, Cato would remain officially enslaved, but with expanded movement rights. The offer was structured not as mercy, but as transaction. Cato listened without interruption. He understood that negotiation requires measured response. He asked only one clarification, that all terms be recorded formally before witnesses in Savannah. The master hesitated, but agreed. Formal record would protect both sides, and protection, once written, becomes harder to reverse. When Cato returned to the quarters that evening, he did not celebrate loudly. He gathered his family and spoke in low tones. He explained the terms. He explained the timeline. He reminded them that discipline must continue. 8 months of whispers had created collapse. 1 year of patience had created negotiation. Now, steady endurance would create transition. The contract was recorded in Savannah in early December of 1852. 2 witnesses signed. The language was careful and precise. It stated that upon successful completion of agreed financial obligations within a defined period, legal manumission papers would be issued for Cato and immediate family. The master insisted on clauses ensuring continued cooperation during the contract. Cato agreed without protest. He understood leverage shifts gradually, not suddenly. Over the next months, Cato expanded his hired labor network in Savannah. He worked with carriage repairs, freight coordination, and stable management. His reputation for reliability spread quietly. White merchants trusted his punctuality. Free black workers respected his discipline. Coin accumulated faster than before. Every payment brought the contract closer to fulfillment. On the plantation, the reduced overseer structure remained cautious. None wished to repeat the chaos of 1851. Rivalry had been replaced with restrained cooperation. Fear of internal collapse remained memory enough to temper pride. The master, though outwardly confident again, carried a quiet awareness that authority can fracture quickly. That awareness made him value stability more than dominance. Cato noticed something subtle. The master no longer spoke of absolute control. He spoke of balance. He no longer compared overseers against one another aggressively. He emphasized coordination. The lesson of psychological warfare had reshaped him without his realizing the source. Spring of 1853 arrived with measured optimism. Cotton yields remained steady. Financial obligations under Cato's contract neared completion faster than projected. The master, reviewing updated ledgers, realized that the arrangement had benefited both parties. He had regained stability without selling land. He had reduced internal rivalry. He had secured consistent income through hired labor. One evening in April, the master called Cato into the study. He held the nearly completed account sheet in his hand. He admitted that the contract terms would likely be fulfilled ahead of schedule. He expressed reluctant admiration for Cato's discipline. Though pride remained, it was quieter now. He understood that his plantation's survival after 1851 had depended more on psychological steadiness than physical enforcement. Cato responded simply. He said stability grows where trust is honored. He did not reference whispers. He did not reference rivalry. He did not reveal the architecture of collapse he had constructed months before. Some victories remained silent for safety. Within the quarters, anticipation built carefully. Freedom was no longer distant imagination. It was scheduled reality, approaching day by day. Yet Cato reminded his family that legal papers must be issued before hope becomes certainty. Until ink dries, patience remains necessary. In early summer of 1853, the final payment required under contract was delivered in Savannah. The witnesses reconvened. The master, bound by written agreement and guided by practical benefit, signed manumission documents. Legal freedom for Cato and his family was recorded formally. The transition was not loud. There was no celebration in the streets. It was quiet, administrative, binding. When Cato returned to the plantation that evening, with the documents secured, he walked not as property, but as a free man, completing final obligations. He gathered his family and showed them the papers. Tears fell silently. There was no shouting, no boasting, only deep breath after long restraint. By sunset, as promised in the vision he carried months earlier, Cato and his family stepped away from Magnolia Grove. They did not run. They departed under lawful agreement. The plantation that had once thrived on rigid overseer rivalry now relied on a memory it would never fully understand. The revenge had never been about blood. It had been about structure. 20 overseers destroyed each other because suspicion replaced trust. One coachman altered the architecture of power through 8 months of carefully placed words. He never raised a hand. He never carried a weapon. Yet by reshaping perception, he reshaped destiny. And Savannah would never fully know how close authority had come to collapsing under the weight of its own pride. Freedom did not feel loud. It did not arrive with drums or crowds. It arrived quietly, carried in folded paper signed in ink. When Cato and his family stepped away from the plantation in the summer of 1853, the road ahead did not promise ease. It promised uncertainty. But uncertainty with choice is different from uncertainty with chains. That difference changed everything. They settled first in Savannah, near the stables where Cato had built his reputation during his contracted labor. The stable owner, a practical man who valued reliability above prejudice, offered him steady work managing horses and coordinating freight deliveries. Cato accepted. He understood that financial stability would secure their freedom more firmly than any declaration. Freedom must be protected with structure. In Savannah, life moved with different rhythm than the plantation. Ships arrived daily at the port. Goods flowed in and out. News traveled faster. Cato observed closely. He saw free black families navigating restricted but real autonomy. He saw laws that limited movement, yet also opportunities that did not exist in fields. He taught his children to read at night with help from a small church group. Education, he believed, would be the next form of protection. He never spoke publicly about the events of September 15th, 1851. He did not recount whispers. He did not describe rivalry. The story belonged to strategy, not pride. Revealing too much could invite danger. Silence remained shield. Chapter 2. On the plantation, reconstruction of authority continued. Replacement overseers eventually stabilized operations. The master regained outward confidence. To outside observers, the deadly meeting became a tragic footnote in plantation history. It was attributed to rivalry and temper. No one suspected deliberate psychological manipulation. That invisibility protected Cato even in freedom. Yet the master felt something he could not name. He occasionally thought of Cato's calm presence during the crisis and after. He occasionally wondered how rivalry had grown so deep without his noticing earlier. He never reached a clear answer. He assumed human weakness had been the cause. In truth, he was correct, but he did not understand how carefully that weakness had been guided. In Savannah, Cato focused on building reputation rather than revisiting past conflict. He saved coin steadily. He invested in small partnerships within the freight business. His discipline impressed merchants. Word spread that he could be trusted with complex deliveries. Trust, once earned, multiplies opportunity. His children grew within this new environment. They understood fragments of their father's strategy, but not its full architecture. He chose not to burden them with details of manipulation. Instead, he taught them lessons in observation. He told them to study pride in others. He told them to listen more than they speak. He told them that strength often hides behind quiet faces. Chapter 3. By 1854, Savannah's economy shifted under larger national tensions. Political debates about slavery intensified across states. Rumors of conflict between North and South grew louder. Cato paid attention carefully. He knew instability among those in power can create opportunity or danger. Experience had taught him that balance matters. He attended church gatherings where free black leaders spoke cautiously about preparation. They discussed community organization, mutual aid, and literacy. They did not speak of rebellion openly, but they spoke of readiness. Cato listened without dominating conversation. He offered insight only when useful. His experience with psychological influence had taught him that leadership is often strongest when subtle. Occasionally, former plantation workers who traveled through Savannah recognized him. They asked how he secured freedom. He answered carefully. He said discipline and negotiation. He did not mention whispers or rivalry. He emphasized patience. He warned that reckless action can destroy long strategy. Some understood. Others wished for faster answers. Cato did not judge. Each path depends on circumstance. The plantation outside Savannah continued producing cotton. It did not collapse. It adapted. The master never knew that its adaptation had been shaped by the very man he once overlooked. The structure of authority had been altered permanently. Overseer rivalry never again reached the intensity of 1851. Caution replaced competition. Fear of internal collapse remained memory. Chapter 4. Cato's influence extended quietly into Savannah's freight network. By 1855, he managed a small team under his supervision. He did not command harshly. He organized schedules clearly. He rewarded reliability. Workers responded with loyalty. His model of leadership contrasted sharply with the plantation overseers of his past. Authority built on trust proved more durable than authority built on fear. His wife established connections with other free women who organized education circles. Their children learned reading and writing more confidently each year. Knowledge expanded possibility. Cato often reflected privately that whispers had secured physical freedom, but education would secure generational freedom. Psychological warfare had been a tool. Wisdom would be legacy. At night, when Savannah quieted and harbor lights flickered across dark water, Cato sometimes stood alone outside the stable yard. He thought about the long path from September 15th, 1851. He remembered the first whisper to Daniel Briggs. He remembered the careful layering of doubt. He remembered counting shots outside the main house. He felt no pride in the deaths. He felt clarity about structure. Pride destroys itself when guided by fear. He understood that his greatest victory was not the collapse of overseers. It was the transformation that followed. Violence had erupted without his hand, but strategy had shaped outcome beyond destruction. He had converted collapse into leverage, leverage into negotiation, negotiation into freedom. Chapter 5. By 1856, 5 years after the meeting that shattered the plantation hierarchy, Cato's family stood firmly established in Savannah. They owned modest property. They maintained business contracts. They participated cautiously in civic life, allowed to free black citizens of the time. The nation edged closer to broader conflict, but within their household, stability held. Cato rarely revisited the past aloud, yet its lessons remained active in every decision he made. He knew that power built on ego can unravel. He knew that suspicion, once planted, grows quickly among insecure men. He knew that patience can accomplish what force cannot. And he knew that silence, when chosen deliberately, is not weakness. It is strategy. The revenge that had begun as 8 months of whispered doubt had changed more than a single plantation. It had altered one family's destiny. It had demonstrated that psychological understanding can reshape systems from within. It had proven that the most powerful weapon is often perception itself. Cato never raised a hand. He never carried a blade. Yet, by understanding pride and fear, he guided events toward transformation. And as Savannah moved toward uncertain future years, his children walked streets as free citizens because of a plan born not from rage, but from careful observation. End of Part 6. Part 7 of 7. Chapter 1. Years passed, and the memory of September 15th, 1851, slowly faded from public conversation, but it never vanished completely. In Savannah, older merchants still remembered the strange news that reached town that morning. A meeting among overseers that ended in deadly chaos. They spoke of it as cautionary tale. Too much rivalry weakens structure. Too much pride invites collapse. None of them ever imagined that the most powerful force in that story had been invisible. Cato continued building his life quietly. By the late 1850s, tensions between northern and southern states deepened into something more serious. Political arguments sharpened. Newspapers carried increasingly heated language. In Savannah's port, sailors argued about tariffs, territory, and slavery. Cato listened the way he always had. He listened without announcing opinion. He observed how fear shaped conversation. He recognized familiar patterns: pride, suspicion, competition. The same forces that had destroyed 20 overseers were rising on a national scale. When war finally erupted in 1861, Savannah felt its tremors. Trade shifted. Resources tightened. Anxiety spread through every social layer. For Cato, the war was not abstract politics. It was confirmation of what he had learned long ago. Systems built on rivalry and fear eventually fracture. Whether in a single room of overseers or across a divided nation, the outcome begins in the mind before it reaches the battlefield. Through those difficult years, Cato protected his family through discipline and preparation. He secured contracts that kept income steady. He moved carefully when military presence increased near the port. He advised his children never to speak carelessly about politics in public. Strategy does not end once freedom is achieved. It evolves. Chapter 2. After the war concluded and slavery ended across the South, Savannah entered a new chapter. Freed people poured into cities, seeking opportunity. Churches expanded. Schools opened. Reconstruction policies reshaped law, though not without resistance. Cato observed again how fragile change can be when pride resists adjustment. Some white citizens adapted reluctantly. Others resisted fiercely. Suspicion returned in different forms. Yet within the black community, education and organization strengthened steadily. Cato's children, now young adults, participated in literacy programs and business cooperatives. They carried themselves with quiet confidence. They knew their father's story in fragments, though he never described every detail. He taught them that influence must be used responsibly. He warned them that manipulating fear carelessly can create destruction beyond intention. Cato sometimes reflected on the 20 overseers who died in that room. He did not celebrate their deaths. He understood that pride and insecurity had driven them as much as his whispers had guided them. He recognized that once fear takes hold, control evaporates quickly. His purpose had never been blood. It had been dismantling a structure that threatened his family's survival. The outcome had been severe, but the system itself had been severe long before he intervened. He carried one quiet truth within himself. Power without self-awareness is unstable. Those overseers had believed they controlled every movement on the plantation, yet they could not control their own insecurity. That insecurity, once stirred, consumed them. Chapter 3. In later years, as Savannah rebuilt and modernized, the story of the deadly overseer meeting drifted further into rumor. Some said it was drunken rage. Some said hidden gambling debts triggered the conflict. Some said it was simple miscommunication. None of those versions included the steady coachman who had once stood beside the carriage shed counting shots. That anonymity protected him and allowed him to live in peace. Cato grew older with quiet dignity. His hair grayed. His posture remained straight. He became known not for whispers, but for wisdom. Younger men sought his advice when disputes arose. He encouraged calm dialogue. He discouraged prideful competition. He explained that rivalry unchecked can destroy community. Few knew how deeply personal that lesson was. On warm evenings, he sometimes gathered his family and spoke of perception. He said that the mind is a field. Whatever you plant grows. Plant fear, and fear multiplies. Plant suspicion, and trust disappears. Plant patience, and opportunity emerges slowly but steadily. His children listened carefully. These were not abstract ideas. They were tools for survival. The plantation outside Savannah eventually changed ownership. New investors brought different management. The names of the 20 overseers faded from records, except as footnote in local archives. Time covered the physical scars, but the psychological lesson endured quietly through one family's story. Chapter 4. By the time Cato reached old age, the world around him had transformed dramatically from the plantation days of his youth. He had witnessed slavery, internal collapse, negotiated freedom, civil war, and reconstruction. Through it all, one principle guided him. Understand human weakness before confronting human power. He never claimed heroism. He never sought recognition. He believed survival with dignity was achievement enough. When asked how he secured freedom, he answered simply, by listening carefully and speaking carefully. Most people underestimated the power of words. He knew better. Words can shift alliances. Words can reshape perception. Words can expose insecurity. and insecurity, once exposed, often does the rest. As he sat one evening overlooking Savannah's harbor, watching ships move across quiet water, he felt no regret for the strategy that had changed his family's fate. He felt gratitude for patience. He felt respect for timing. He understood that violence had erupted not because he forced it, but because pride and suspicion had been waiting for ignition. He had merely provided spark to dry wood already stacked. The revenge that changed history was never recorded in textbooks. It was not celebrated publicly. It did not carry banners or proclamations. It lived in subtle shift of authority. It lived in a family stepping into freedom by sunset. It lived in the quiet knowledge that psychological warfare can dismantle systems more effectively than open battle. Chapter 5. And so the story of the Whisperer of Savannah closes where it began, not with raised weapons, but with understanding. September 15th, 1851, remains a date marked by confusion in public record. But in the private memory of one man and his descendants, it marked the beginning of transformation. 20 overseers destroyed each other because they allowed suspicion to control them. One enslaved coachman secured freedom because he understood suspicion better than they did. He never raised a hand. He never fired a shot. He never stood in open rebellion. He studied pride. He studied fear. He studied rivalry. Then he guided those forces carefully until they consumed themselves. This story is a work of historical fiction. The characters, events, and timelines are fictional, inspired by themes of resistance, power, and survival. Yet its lesson is deeply real. Systems built on ego and mistrust carry seeds of their own destruction. Those who observe quietly can sometimes reshape destiny without appearing to act at all. Thank you for staying with Shadows of Black History through this entire journey. Tell us where you are watching from, your city, your country, and the time. If you have not subscribed and liked our channel, please do so now. Stories like this remind us that history is not only shaped by strength of arms, but by strength of mind. Until next time, remain patient, remain observant, and never underestimate the power of a whisper.